Hey everyone, and welcome to our study here. We're looking at the 250 events in the life of Christ, and we're doing this chronologically. And today we're hitting. We looked at the Samaritan woman at the well the last 2 days, and this is a continuation of that. And we're looking at Jesus telling about the spiritual harvest that's coming. And this is again in line with the Samaritan woman and her visit. She's gone off, and so we're going to see this, and this is going to come from John 4 verses 27 through 38. And so in verse 27, um excuse me, in verse 27, the disciples come back, and they're shocked to find that Jesus is talking with this woman. And like we've already talked about in the last 2 days, this would have been very unlikely and frowned upon for a rabbi or a teacher, much less a man, to be speaking to a woman in public. It was frowned upon, and the Jews actually warned against it because they actually warned against spending too much time talking to women. One, because of temptation, and two, it appeared immodest or inappropriate, and so and honestly, a lot of times there was the thought too that it was a waste of time to try to teach women. And so that was kind of a cultural thing that they had there, and Jesus was breaking all those barriers that we see there, because we know that's not true. And so when the disciples come back and see him, they're shocked, and they're like, they were all too scared. They wouldn't even ask him, but in their minds, it's like, what do you want with her, or why are you talking to her? And so we see in verse 28, she leaves her water jar. The reason she had came there was to get water for the day. She leaves that water and she runs back to the village. She didn't walk back. She didn't slowly. She runs back, and so she left there. She abandoned her purpose for coming because she found something much greater, and now she's going to tell her about it. And so the woman eagerly witnesses to the townspeople whom she previously had reasoned to avoid. She was coming in the middle of the day at noon, when it was the hottest, close to the hottest part of the day, instead of coming in the morning or the evening like with the rest of the women that usually would come out and get the water. And so she's all of a sudden she's met the Jesus, she's met the Messiah, and she doesn't care about her reputation anymore. She doesn't care. She is so excited that she runs back. So it's interesting to see that a woman that had no credibility before now all of a sudden has credibility in this town. And here's the other thing I want you to point out too. And we don't, again, like I've talked about, we don't hit on a lot of these things. This is one of the first people to preach Jesus. Besides John the Baptist, who talked about and prepared people for Jesus' coming, this is the first recording since of Jesus starting his ministry, of the first person preaching Jesus, and she preaches Jesus to an entire town. And we're going to see that many people believed in him. We're going to see that. So I want to make that a point, because I think it's important that the first person to preach Jesus was a woman. I just want to throw that out there, and because I think sometimes we forget the importance of women, and in the church a lot of times we have discounted the importance and the how much women really can do. We oversee that, or we use a few verses that really we take them out of context, and we try to push women into a corner of, well, you can work in our kitchen and you can take care of our babies, but there's so many more important roles for them, and we're going to look at that as we get through that. This isn't John, but I like Luke, because Luke really pulls all this out, and we're going to see that the first people to preach Jesus after his crucifixion was women. And so it's interesting to see this, and I think Jesus does this on purpose. But that's just my thought as I dive into this. And so we see that she goes into the town. We're going to see a little bit more as they come out. We're going to hit a lot of that tomorrow. But while that happens, while she goes into town, the his disciples are urging him to eat. He's like, okay, we've been traveling where it's hot. You've been out here. You need to eat. And his response, and we see this in verse 32 and 34 through 34, was, I have a kind of food that you know nothing about. And again, he's speaking spiritually, but the disciples don't get, just like the Samaritan woman didn't understand when he was speaking spiritually about the water. He's speaking spiritually about the food. And they're confused, and it's like, well, did someone bring you some food while we were gone? What happened here? How we went to get you food, and it's like, what's happening? And he lets them know, it's like, my nourishment comes from doing the will of God who sent me. And we need to kind of get in that state of mind. When Jesus was talking to the Samaritan woman, he was performing the will of his Father, and he received greater sustenance from that than from anything the physical food could bring him. And the other thing that's awesome is the accomplishment of his mission was more important to him than physical food. And so I wonder, how often is our mission, our goal, our what God has commanded us to do, how important is that than our other physical needs that we, or even sometimes not even so much physical needs, but just our general busyness, our general, you know, option usually, or the methods that we put up with, and things that we switch into that we make more important, just our daily routines that really aren't necessary, but we still make them more important or put them above God in our communication with God, our prayer, and things like that. And so, he's saying, look, I may be hungry, I may be thirsty, but man, these people's spiritual condition is so much more important than that right now, than me eating and me having food or having water. And so we see that. And then he goes into verse 35 where he says, it's a whole proverb about 4 months between planting and harvesting. But I say, so he's saying that sometimes that if he parallels this with his ministry, it's like, oh well, I've just started, so it's going to be months before I harvest. And I think he's talking about I know he's talking about the spiritual harvest of souls here. But he's saying, look, right, yeah, we just kind of started, but open your eyes, and the fields are ripe with harvest. And I imagine, and I'm pretty sure this is what he would have seen, is while he was saying that, more than likely the townspeople were coming out, and they were walking out to meet him. And so he's saying, look, the spiritual harvest is already ready. The seeds have already been planted way before I got here. John the Baptist did a lot of that. And so he's saying, look up and see. And so the people of this town would have been walking out looking like, probably, grains, depending on how many, like he's comparing this with the harvest grains and grains that are ready to be harvested. And he's talking about these people that come out. And so he goes on to say in verse 7 that one plants and another harvests, and it's true, right? And I think this is a reference back to John the Baptist, who was preparing for him, and then all the other, you can go back to all the other prophets and those who prepared the coming, and the way Jesus was coming in, and prepared the way for him. And so it's been prepared already. They knew the Messiah was coming. She talked about that. She goes and tells him, hey, this guy told me all these things. Could he possibly be the Messiah? And so, excuse me, you see this happening. And so what we need to get into the idea of is, it gets very easy, and I've talked about this the last time, 2 lessons. It gets very easy for us to get into this ego trip of, well, I'm sowing and I'm reaping, and I'm going to be the one. I'm the one that studied with him. I'm the one who's going to baptize. And we need to get into that idea that, and Jesus emphasizes, it's not always the one who first tells someone about salvation that, brings that person to Christ or to belief. But sometimes it's often someone who comes along later. And we need to learn that this is a team exercise, right? Not everyone you talk to about Christ is going to immediately be baptized, but you can plant those seeds, right? You can plant those seeds by behaving in a Christian manner, being that Christ-like example that we're supposed to be. And maybe that doesn't immediately, convert someone or bring someone to belief, but depending on your behavior, that could be a very strong influence later on down the road. And think, man, I remember how that person was, or I remember how all these Christians have been towards me, and they've been extremely nice, and. And so that's what we want to. That's what we want to do, is right. Because you're not always going to be the one who sows and plants and sows and reaps, and it doesn't work that way all the time. So we need to make sure they've got that. And so the last point there is, Jesus sent his disciples to reap what others had sowed. And I mentioned John the Baptist, was the last of the prophets, and he had been preaching Jesus for a while now. And I think that's what a lot of this references to, but also it's an example of us that we have to work together. in bringing people to Christ. It's not a one man. It's not just your preacher's job. It's not just your pastor's job. It's not, a couple of your elders or your deacon's job to do this. It's everyone's job in the church to work together to bring people to Christ. And so I think we need to remember that, because I think too often, I've seen it as a preacher's kid. I've seen so many times where it's like, oh, well, preacher, you need to go talk to my neighbor. Or I have this friend, you need to talk to them. And no, I mean, yeah, the preacher can do that, and it's good, but you need to be the example. They know you, right? You need to be doing that. So, and then maybe you so and so, and maybe it's someone else who finally, I won't say push them over the edge, but gets them over that last hurdle into belief. And so we need to make sure we're working together, and that we as Christians are doing our jobs, not just relying on the leadership of the church to do everything, because that's not the way the church is supposed to work. And we'll see that as we go through. But so Jesus tells them about the spiritual harvest, and tomorrow we're going to look at the many Samaritans who believe. Real short section, but again, it's important to see how this short little interaction, Jesus taking his time to go outside or go through Samaria, go around, or go through where most people would go around, and see why he had to go through. And this is really the first time that he really starts converting people into belief and really kicks his ministry off with people understanding who he is and believing him. And it's with the people who are the outcasts. We continue to focus on that, because I think that's an important thing to look at. So again, as always, I hope you're enjoying these videos. I appreciate you taking the time to watch them. If you could, please share them with those who you think would be beneficial. And then if you haven't subscribed already, again, please ask you to subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.